Good evening. I'm Ann Nishimura Morse. I'm the William and Helen Pound Senior Curator for Japanese Art here at the museum. Welcome to the 14th Annual Rad Smith Lecture on Japanese Art. Before his death in 1998, Rad Smith was influential in the Boston community in promoting and supporting Japanese culture. He served as the co-chairman of the Friends of Asian Art here at the museum and as a member of the board of directors of the Japan Society of Boston. Continuing Rad's efforts, his wife, Rena Koopman, has generously endowed this yearly event. Tonight, Rena is with us, along with her children, Zandy and Jordan. We would like to express our deep appreciation to Rena for supporting this program. Thank you. Through the years, the speakers for the Rad Smith Lecture, among them the photographer Sugimoto Hiroshi, the architect Bon Shigeru, and last year the painters and performance artists Shinohara Ushio and Shinohara Noriko, have presented us with new perspectives on the art of Japan, perspectives that have not been afforded by the MFA collection heretofore. 4 years ago, we gathered 2 days after 3/11. We were here to learn more about the contemporary practice of tea, but the day became a time of contemplation following the devastating earthquake and tsunami in Tohoku. This spring, my co-curators, Anne Havinga, the Yusuf and Estrelita Carr Senior Curator of Photography, and research fellow Tomoko Nagakura, and I have organized the exhibition In the Wake, Japanese Photographers Respond to 3/11, which is now on view in the Foster Galleries. Central to the realization of this project has been the participation of our speaker tonight, Hatakeyama Naoya. In 2004, the bilingual art quarterly, Art It, declared Hatakeyama Naoya to be one of the leaders of the next generation of Japanese photographers. A graduate of the University of Tsukuba, where he had been inspired by the work of the avant-garde photographer Otsuji Kiyoshi, Hatakeyama had already by that time garnered the prestigious Kimura Ihei Memorial Photography Award and the Mainichi Award of Art, and had represented Japan at the 49th Venice Biennale. His series Limeworks, which explores the excavation of quarries around his childhood home in Tohoku and other places in Japan, and his River series that investigates Tokyo's forgotten waterways, had also been identified as important contributions for their meticulous compositions and for the eloquent intelligence of their conception. In recent years, his work has been the subject of several solo exhibitions, including Natural Stories, which was organized by the Tokyo Metropolitan Museum of Photography, and later displayed at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art in 2012. On 3/11, Hatakeyama lost his mother and his family home in the tsunami-ravaged town of Rikuzentakata. Since that time, he has collaborated with the architect Ito Toyo in the award-winning presentation at the Japan Pavilion in the 2012 Venice Biennale, Home for All, which looked at design practices that could help victims in his town. Hatakeyama has also returned repeatedly to photograph Rikuzentakata to examine the landscape that he once knew so intimately. But now that landscape is irrevocably changed, and it continues to change. As Hatakeyama has stated, the photographs that he has taken have not been intended for an exhibition project. They are his own personal response to what befell his family and community on 3/11. This evening, we are particularly honored and privileged to have Hatakeyama Naoya with us. We thank him for being so willing to share with us his thoughts about his own photography following the disaster. Please please join me in welcoming Hatakeyama-san.
Good evening. I am Naoya Hatakeyama, and I have come here from Tokyo. I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight, and I'd also like to thank the Museum of Fine Arts Boston for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to talk. First, I want to take this opportunity to say arigato to those from the United States who extended their warm helping hands to the victims of the Great East Japan earthquake. For example, US forces based in Japan went to devastated area in the Tohoku region immediately after the tsunami disaster and joined with Japan's self-defense forces to carry out rescue operations and provide support for those stricken by the disaster. This mission was called Operation Tomodachi. My sister still keeps a ready-to-eat US military ration in a moss green pouch that she was given at that time. Now, a series of my photographs called Rikuzentakata is included in the current exhibition in the wake. I would like to talk about the circumstances behind these photographs in the hope of deepening understanding of the exhibition as a whole. I have walked through and seen the exhibition for the first time yesterday. As a participant, it is somewhat difficult to see the exhibition objectively, but perhaps because I'm seeing it here in Boston, there was one thing that struck me especially, and I would like to start by discussing this. For many decades, there have been photographs that documented disasters and wars, and shows that exhibited such photographs. Traditionally, these images were shot by professionals who came in from outside the disaster zone, documented it, and took the image back to show to people in other regions. Many photographs have been produced this way. In these cases, it can be said that the photographers came from outside the event. In contrast, I felt that this exhibition in the wake is somewhat different. What is different, as the subtitle, Respond, implies, is that the participant in this exhibition became involved in the disaster to a greater or lesser degree and photographed by way of response. In other words, the photographers did not come from outside the event, but rather seemed to be within the event. There are 16 Japanese photographers, including myself, participating in this exhibition, but perhaps because I'm seeing it here in Boston, all of the participants appear to be living together on an island that was stricken by historically rare disaster. Each of the acts of photography appears as responding to 3/11, the Great East Japan earthquake, from within. But even so, there certainly were differences in how each photographer became involved with 3/11. If we move our viewpoint to within Japan, much like enlarging a world map, the subtle differences start to become apparent. Looking at the list of participants, many of them, including myself, live in Tokyo. And its vicinity. Though some reside in the Tohoku region and were actually hit and affected by the tsunami. Still others live and work overseas. Some have gone to the disaster zone to take photographs, and others have taken photographs without going to the area. In my case, Rikuzentakata, where I was born and raised in the Tohoku region, was hit by the tsunami, and I have been going there to photograph ever since. I lost family there. Our home was carried away, and the town I remember fondly has disappeared. So I feel that I was very much within the disaster. However, in the eyes of the local government, I am an outsider. In order to facilitate coming in and out of the disaster zone from Tokyo, I went to the City Hall to apply for a disaster victim certificate. But I was told, we cannot issue a certificate to those whose current address is not registered here. In other words, because you live in Tokyo and not here, by law, you are not regarded as a victim of the disaster. To be sure, when I faced the actual disaster victims in my hometown, who narrowly escaped death after being swallowed by the black water, who were left without homes and lost their jobs, I had to admit I am not one of them. At such times, I'd wonder about the scope of a disaster like this. I might think that I was within this event, but someone would tell me, no, you are on the outside. I'd resign myself to that when someone else would sympathize with me and say, it must have been hard on you. I have referred to being outside and within the event, but the boundary between the outside and inside sways widely depending on the circumstance, on who you are talking to, and on the distance. For the past 4 years, the most troubling problem for me while photographing has been this issue of the swaying outside-within boundary, and the issue of how others apply this outside-within to me, or in a word, the problem of positionality. Compared to the weight of the disaster, this may be no more than a psychological issue, but because it is a psychological issue, it creates a variety of pressures among people, and it becomes an important issue when thinking about how a disaster expressed. For example, let's say a photographer I don't know is standing close to me in the disaster zone. He and I are both taking photographs of the foundation of a house that was swept away by the tsunami. Our photographs may come out looking similar, but suppose I point at the foundation and tell him, my home used to stand here. What would happen? The difference in our reason for taking the photographs will become clear. My reason is personal. His reason is not personal. I am within, and he comes from outside. The moment he discovers that, he may no longer feel comfortable and decide to stop taking photographs. Because my words that convey a simple fact influence the action of another, it can be said that those words definitely have a certain kind of power. This is the power of being within, the power of being personal. I must quickly add that this power is not something I have obtained personally, but rather is a power given to me by certain events. not the power attached to me, but the power that envelops my surroundings. In that respect, this power is only a relative thing, and not something one can be proud of or enjoy exercising. It is something that forces me to be ever vigilant to ensure that I do not express that power carelessly. One cannot tell just by looking. It can only be conveyed with words. I would like to talk about my photography from the perspective of the complex psychological experience of this notion of power. This is the meaning of the title of today's talk, Personal Landscape. To digress somewhat, I feel that this problem of outside within is always attached to the act of photographing. Whenever I hold a camera up to a subject and press the shutter button, I always feel as if my body is being forcibly pushed outside of the reality that contains the subject before my eyes. I sometimes even think that in order to remain within the reality, I would have to discard my camera and talk to or feel the subject. This suspicion of photography does not specifically concern the disaster, but because this is an exhibition of photography, I feel that this notion needs to be kept in the back of our minds. Rikuzentakata is located in Iwate Prefecture, about 95 miles north of the Fukushima #1 nuclear plant in Fukushima Prefecture. 4 years ago, on March 11, 2011, an earthquake of 9.0 magnitude struck off the coast of Miyagi Prefecture. It is considered to be the fourth largest earthquake in recorded history after earthquakes in Chile, Alaska, and Sumatra. 30 minutes after the earthquake struck, Rikuzentakata was hit by an historically unprecedented 17-meter high tsunami. It is said that the total death toll of 3/11 was over 18,000, and most of those who died were drowned by the tsunami. Of the total death toll, about 1,700, or almost 10% of those who perished, were from my hometown, Rikuzentakata. It had a population of around 23,000, and a relatively large river called Kesengawa River flowed through the town. At the mouth of the river is a 5-kilometer wide alluvial plain where many of the people lived. This was the reason the death toll was higher than other nearby towns and villages, where there is less flat land. My mother, who turned 84 years old on that very day of March 11th, was among those who died. My mother lived together with my older sister, but my sister worked as a teacher at an elementary school built on a high ground, and she was saved from death. The family home she had rebuilt for herself, my mother, and me was swept away by the waves just 6 months after they began living in it. Thinking back about how I was 4 years ago, it is hard to believe that I'm here in the US, now calm and speaking in front of all of you. Back then, it was all I could do to think about today and tomorrow. It was impossible for me to even imagine 4 years later what seemed like a distant future. Although I was born and raised in Rikuzentakata, I left home to attend university. And after graduating, when I was 26 years old, I have lived in Tokyo ever since. It is very common for those of us born in the provinces to come to Tokyo for university or for other reasons, and to end up staying there for years. When I ask someone I meet for the first time in Tokyo, "Where are you born?" many times the name of provincial regions come up. This has been the case since the war, especially during the period of high economic growth in the 60s, when every year 1 million people moved from all over Japan to the big cities to find jobs. Although I have been living in Tokyo, I would go back to Rikuzentakata a few times every year, at New Year's or for the summer memorial service for our ancestors. I'd see my mother, my sister, relatives and friends. I also enjoyed walking around the small town, recalling my childhood days. I am a photographer, but I mainly take photographs of landscapes and architecture, and I do not take many snapshots in my day-to-day life. But after around 2000, when I passed the age of 40, I began to casually take photographs of trivial things whenever I returned to Rikuzentakata. As I added years, the adults around me naturally got older. I would get phone calls from my mother, and often she would tell me that a relative had died or one of our neighbors had died. The population was declining. There were fewer young people, and the town no longer had the vitality it had when I was a child. I began to casually photograph Rikuzentakata, especially the Kesencho area where I was born, with a feeling of nostalgia. I would return to Tokyo, print the photographs, pin them up on my studio wall, and gaze at them. I'd get lost in a reverie, looking at the photographs and thinking about the wonders and cruelty of the passing of time, and what's to come for my family and me. These photographs are not the type of photographs that I exhibit at galleries and museums, but rather they are personal photographs, not meant to be shown to others. When I was through looking at them, I would put them in a box and store them away on the shelf. But after March 11th, 2011, these photographs in the box began to hold completely different meaning. People I photographed by chance had died. A girl who was playing the flute at a festival became a girl without a father. Bridges and buildings and the photographs were swept away by the tsunami. And the festival float is also gone. After our photo albums filled with memories disappeared in the tsunami, I realized that images of the peaceful town from the past remain only in my mind and in the few photographs I had taken. In the fall of 2011, I was given the opportunity to hold an exhibition called Natural Stories at the Tokyo Metropolitan Museum of Photography. Preparation for this exhibition started 2 years in advance, and I chose nature as the theme because I had recently had an exhibition at another museum that focused on cities and architecture. Of course, photographs of Rikuzentakata were not in the initial list for the exhibition. The exhibition was held 6 months after 3/11, and I decided to hastily incorporate landscape from Rikuzentakata after the tsunami, as well as images of the peaceful town before the tsunami. At the time, this was the most urgent matter to me, and given the reality of the disaster and the loss to my hometown, it would have been unnatural to not address this matter. But members of the museum staff and some others voiced their concern that the photograph of Rikuzentakata had a distinctive quality that would seem out of place in the context of my other work. Some suggested that the personal photographs would interrupt the flow of the exhibition of my highly abstract photographs. Others thought that these personal photographs would appear too graphic and evocative just 6 months after the disaster. And more fundamentally, can these personal photographs be called works of art? These opinions caused me to reflect on my work. Of course, we all know examples of exceptional photographers for whom personal photography is the core of their photographic expression. There are great photographers whose subject is family or friends or local society who refuse to draw a line between their personal life and art when they work. But I have never been that type of photographer. Moreover, I have always kept my distance from such photography. Not only am I a photographer who does not take snapshots, I usually do not take photographs of people. Some may find it odd for a photographer to say, I do not take photographs of people. But those of you who frequent museums will understand that such photographers are not unusual historically. When I am exposed to the feeling that photographs of people engender, the uniqueness of a certain moment at a certain place, and the atmosphere of once and only, I feel hopelessly sad and feel like crying. And because I don't want to cry, the least I can do is avoid taking such photographs myself. It was something of a contradiction then, when I gradually began to take photographs of my mother with her bent back, children at festivals, or friends rowing boats on that river. These were personal photographs that I did not intend to show to anyone. And I told myself that it was okay to look at them and cry once in a while. But after the tsunami, I showed these very photographs in public at the museum. Suppose there is an artist who stubbornly believes that the breakdown of consistency in a style of work means defeat to the artist. So he should not depart from what he usually does. Suppose he stuck to this belief, even in the face of such an overwhelming event. I personally would not want to go to near such an artist. Fundamentally, what artists show us is not how they engage their own works of art, but how they engage their own world. I think the notions like consistency of style are insignificant compared to the magnitude of an event like 3/11. Do we really need art that can sustain itself only by insisting on consistency? My snapshot do not provide a comprehensive picture of what the town looked like before. So in that sense, they are not complete as a record of the town. But if one looks at them now that the town had disappeared, I think one can sense the atmosphere of the town back then. At the exhibition, I showed scenes of Kesencho before the tsunami struck as a slideshow rather than as prints. Viewing a slideshow of the photograph is similar to thinking back on the past. Scenes in our memory appear and disappear. They are fleeting, and there is no intense movement like in movies. 60 prints were mounted on the opposite wall, showing scenes of the destruction of the town after the tsunami. In between my many trips from Tokyo to Rikuzentakata, I had printed them hurriedly in the darkroom, then framed and mounted them as they were. For the slideshow, a video monitor was embedded in the wall with a spotlight to make it look as if a single print was mounted. Some viewers were surprised to see that the picture in the frame had changed before they noticed it. The reaction of the viewers varied. One even told me, "I was never interested in your work before, but I thought the pictures in the slideshow were good." The world is always beyond my comprehension. A publishing company took notice of my exhibition, and the following year, I was able to publish a book called Kesengawa, which had a photograph of before and after the tsunami. After that, a French publishing company also offered to publish my work after seeing the exhibition on tour in Amsterdam, and a bilingual French-English book based on the Japanese original was published the following year. The editor had requested an essay for the book, so I started to write, thinking back to the days after the earthquake struck. Because the train stopped running for several days, I rode a motorcycle from Tokyo to Rikuzentakata. The memory was so strong that I wrote a detailed account of the trip, and the essay grew longer than I intended. The book designer used quick wit and interspersed the essay among the photograph. Resulting in an unusual book where photographs and words are interwoven. The essay I wrote starts like this. Something is happening, not here, somewhere far away. In that familiar place, something huge is taking place. I cannot see what is going on from where I am now. I wait a little, in the faint hope that someone might be able to tell me something, but it seems that no one can do anything for me. I have no other choice than to go to somewhere where I will be able to see what is happening. It will take time, probably several days, to reach my destination. But in a few days, I should be able to see and to understand what has happened to my town, my home, my family. I should finally be able to understand everything. However, for the few days that the journey will take, I will still have seen nothing. I must move forward without knowing anything. After this, the description of my trip to Rikuzentakata continues at length. The photographs of the once peaceful town interspersed with the text are also scenes of my hometown that came to mind as I rode my motorcycle north through the falling snow. Then there is one blank page. Followed by scenes of the town that has completely changed. And no text accompanies these photographs. I feel that I would need hours to talk about this one book. How, in the end, should I see this series of photographs? One thing I can say for sure is that this cannot be called a project. Curators often ask, what is your new project about? As if it is a greeting of some sort. But right now, I'm not able to clearly answer such a question. It is not possible for anyone to conceptualize or to plan photographs like the ones you are seeing now as something to project. These photographs were created as a result of my getting involved in an unexpected, unfortunate event. Because of this, curators would tell me, I cannot comment on your photographs of Rikuzentakata. Indeed, it would miss the mark to say words often used in criticism of work or project, such as interesting, boring, or good, or bad, or beautiful, not beautiful. In commenting on these photographs of mine, it may even be that some feel it is morally reprehensible to make such comments. When the subject of the photographs involves many deaths, towns that were swept away and vanished, the sorrow of those who survived, the hardship and worry, it becomes difficult to use words like interesting or boring that are often used to critic work. I discussed earlier the comparison between me and another photographer taking photographs of the foundation of my family home. And perhaps a similar thing occurs when one is viewing the photographs. There is a peculiar power surrounding these photographs that prohibits one from making a casual evaluation. Even if this was not my intention, the viewer must feel a sense of unease toward this power. I think it is not easy to analyze this power. On the other hand, why is it that photographs that are called projects or works of art trigger an abundance of words to the point of verbosity, in contrast to this uncomfortable silence? This question would not have occurred to me before now. To be honest, since the tsunami, I think I have been photographing without wondering whether my photographs are works of art or not. If I have been photographing with the sense that nothing can be done, even if the photograph gives viewers a sense of unease and only produce silence or deny the possibility of evaluation. I'm not taking photographs in Rikuzentakata for media such as newspapers or magazines. I'm not photographing because someone has asked me to. No, is it for art galleries or museums? There is no point to showing these photographs to those who are affected by the tsunami. But then, I am not making these photographs for myself either. It may sound a bit strange, but from the day after the tsunami to the present, I've had the feeling that someone is demanding something of me. That demand doesn't seem to come from a personal place, in other words, from within myself, but rather from outside of myself. I am actually photographing with the feeling that I am responding to that demand. In this, I feel it is an act of response in the true meaning of the word. The thing I'm responding to is definitely not the tsunami. It is impossible and nonsensical to respond to a tsunami. What I am responding to is a someone with a voice that is calling upon me. It could be my mother, acquaintances, my dear friends and their families, mentors I respect, or my schoolmates who have died. I cannot clearly explain who the someone is, but it is clear to me that the someone is in the sphere occupied by love and respect. That may have been an overblown, theological sounding way of stating things, but upon seeing the word respond in the subtitle for this exhibition, I felt reassured and encouraged, because response conveys a deeper truth than the word project has over the past 4 years. The sensation of response that welled up inside me perhaps suggests the possibility that things seen as personal might become social things. For this very reason, I imagine that the word responsibility might derive from the words possibility of response. Furthermore, this raises the question of whether it is possible to reinterpret the entire act of responding and to organize it as a project. In other words, to incorporate it into a method of art. If it is possible, those curators who have said, "I cannot comment," might be able to talk about it more freely. But thinking more deeply about this issue, we'll have to wait for another occasion. In regard to the landscape aspect of the title of my talk, I should address it more by showing recent scenes of Rikuzentakata. For example, if I were to continue my earlier discussion and say, my home was at the foot of the rainbow, we could analyze the typically unspeakable atmosphere that attaches to this personal landscape. I'm sure that my word would change the expression of this very photograph. Is the value or the significance of this landscape thus determined in a linguistic manner and not in visual manner? Am I able to show my personal landscape without the aid of the words, like many museum artists do? Other topics include actual large-scale civil engineering project, the problem of local residents losing their grasp of time, and the issue of how to preserve remains from the disaster for the sake of future imagination. There is a question of why the lone, majestic pine tree that survived from among 70,000 other trees had been preserved as a monument at the cost of $1.3 million. This is from my recent exhibition at Nikon Salon in Tokyo, earlier in April. 63 landscapes were exhibited on the wall. Some of these are also exhibited here in Boston. Since the tsunami, I have been traveling between Tokyo and Rikuzentakata pretty much every month and have been photographing mainly landscapes. In the beginning, the terrible extent of the disaster and anger and sadness at the destruction of the places of my memory were the reasons for photographing the area. These reasons can definitely be said to be personal. Earlier, I mentioned that the center of Rikuzentakata was on the plain created by the river. In some of these photographs, it is possible to see how the town was built at pretty much the same elevation as the river. About half of the houses in the entire town, including mine, were built on this low land. When I recall how no one, including myself, raised a doubt about living on such low land, I feel a lump in my throat. Many of those who lost their homes but survived the tsunami and now live in temporary shelters on school grounds used to live on this plain. Will they return there? No. Many of them say they do not wish to live in the lowland anymore. They think that since they have lost everything, they would rather start anew in a place where they can feel safe. The national government, the prefecture and town administration are all proactive in trying to build a new and safe town so that the tragedy is not repeated in the future. This new community development specifically involves building residential area on higher ground. Simply put, the idea is to cut into the surrounding mountains and create flat surface to build on, while taking the excavated earth to the lowland to raise its surface level. In the mountainous region where I come from, this is the only way to acquire flat, level land at higher elevations. In addition to this development, constructions of a 12.5 meter high breakwater is about to start to prepare for another big tsunami that might hit in the region in the future. The fact that the scale of the civil engineering works is huge means it will affect the surroundings. With the rise in construction costs and shortage of workers, excessive cost and time are being spent on building homes. People are waiting for the completion of land development for home construction, which could take upwards of 5 to 6 years from the year of the tsunami. But as they wait for the completion, they age 5 to 6 years at the same time. If they are elderly persons, they will hesitate to build new homes. I'm also allotted a plot of land on higher ground, which reduces in area from the original plot, but I'm still undecided as to what to do about it. The nature of the landscape in Rikuzentakata is changing. I began to feel this strongly in the latter part of 2013. When the ruins are cleared, the original blocks are filled and new rows are built on top of them, it becomes difficult to recall the time before the tsunami from the landscape. The new townscape is entering a new phase by making a clean break with the memories of the past. There are now far fewer memories in my photographs. Rather, there are more photographs of huge civil engineering projects. Now, and as a result, I'm losing my confidence about continuing to call this landscape personal. Since the 80s, I have been photographing limestone mines all over Japan. These photographs were made into a series called Limeworks. And when I visited Rikuzentakata recently, I was surprised to see that the landscape there started to resemble the mines I know so well. But this is naturally so, because the method of carving out the mountains is exactly the same method used in mining an open pit mine. The heavy equipment like dump trucks comes from the same manufacturers as those used at the mines. Explosives are used to mine limestone, and in Rikuzentakata too. Explosives are used every day to break up thick limestone bedrock deep in the mountains. At the mines, I often watched the equipment that grind rock into small pieces and watched the end of the conveyor drop earth as it moved. The scenes I encounter now in Rikuzentakata gives me a strange sense of déjà vu. After the land development is completed, some years from now, I was told that all of the machinery and equipment, including the giant suspension bridges for the conveyors, will be dismantled. The town will be very quiet and will probably no longer look like a large mine. And I wonder how the town where I was born and raised will look. It ought to look like what we envisioned after the tsunami, but I don't think there is anyone anywhere who can tell me with confidence that the town will look the way we hope it will be. As if one responding to the massiveness of the tsunami, the current rebuilding project is also huge. Because it is huge, once the project starts, there is almost no way to stop it. It will take time and there is no going back. The number of residents who gave up trying to stay in Rikuzentakata and moved on to other places is approaching to the number of those who lost their lives in the tsunami. Those with the financial ability have already bought a plot of land in the mountain area and built a house and started a new life. Questions arise as to whether the initially planned number of houses will have been built when the huge civil engineering projects are done, and whether the town we dreamed of will be reborn. The outlook on these questions have been undergoing a constant downward revision. For years after the tsunami struck, the landscape of Rikuzentakata for me right now appears as a mixture of the personal and the non-personal. Right now, I'm feeling as if my body that was within the event is gradually being pulled out as time passes by. Perhaps this is what people refer to as oblivion. Thank you very much.
And we have time for a few questions from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I will bring the microphone to you.
Do you feel your fellow photographers are reacting in the same way that you have reacted as a result of the tsunami?
Excuse me, I'm answering in Japanese, and there is a very nice translator next to me. So,
So I think my fellow photographers, they did their best to their extent to respond to tsunami. They did as much as possible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.